morning and welcome back to the Guyana Extractives Transparency Week. We are really glad to have you join us this morning. And if you have been participating in the events yesterday on day one, welcome back. And if you tuned into our first session earlier today, then again, welcome back. We love to have your participation. We love to have your questions. And I'm sure our next presenter will love to see your opinions and hear your questions, so she'll be able to answer them real time here with you today. And the topic at hand is commodity trading transparency, why it is important to Guyana. And our next speaker is Fatma Nyambura. She is from the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, EITI. Now, a little bit about the topic itself. Commodities play an important economic role in every country. Guyana is no exception. Oil and gas, minerals and metals, as well as other natural resources and agricultural products are traded on a global scale daily. Created greater transparency in commodity markets can reduce loss of public revenues, illicit financial flows, and prevent opportunities for corruption. So let's hear from Ms. Fatma Nyambura from EITI and hear her opening words, and we'll be happy to take some questions throughout the whole presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'll just begin with a quick recap of what is the EITI for those who did not attend yesterday's session by Francisco. The EITI is a global standard for governance of extractive industries. It is currently implemented in 55 countries, and we have more than 60 plus supporting companies. So to date, $2.6 trillion in revenues has been disclosed through EITI reporting. But most importantly, 95% of EITI data is publicly available in open data format in order to enable citizens to download this information, interrogate it, and ask their representatives questions. So really the aim of the EITI is to bring all stakeholders together. And here we look at government, investors, companies, and most importantly, citizens through civil society actors. With that in mind, my presentation is going to focus on commodity sales. I will begin by looking at what are the EITI requirements with regard to commodity sales, and then delve into the government's role in disclosures. Additionally, we will also look at the role of companies because these transactions involve two parties. And lastly, we will look at what is next for Guyana. Before we kick off on the EITI requirements on disclosure of commodity sales, let us first look at why is commodity trading transparency important. 80% of the world's petroleum reserves are controlled by states or SOEs. And many of these resource-rich countries receive their share of revenue from the exploitation of their oil, gas, and minerals in kind. What we mean by the term in kind is that the country will receive barrels of oil or actually receive hard gold. And as you can see here from the picture to the right, the value of commodities sold by national oil companies and states has been $2.54 billion of, when compared to development assistance of $26 billion in the same year. This is a drop in the ocean. So the purpose of this infographic is to show you the importance of commodity sales, and more importantly, why transparency is so critical and so key to this part of the industry. Hence, the EITI decided to develop guidelines and requirements related to commodity trading. This infographic just shows you a timeline of commodity trading transparency milestones within the EITI. Most important, beginning with Iraq, which in 2011 became the first country to publish data on its crude oil sales to all commodity traders through EITI reporting. If we fast forward to 2016, The 2016 EITA standard contained requirements about the sales of in-kind revenues and stated that these disclosures should be broken down by buyer. And that is what we call disaggregation of data. That is, breaking down and not just providing one big lump sum revenue without understanding who exactly these commodities are being sold to, or rather, who is the purchaser. 2019 was a very significant year in commodity trading transparency. This is because the IMF formally recognized the need for governments to enhance their disclosures of transparency in the payments to government through its Fiscal Transparency Code. And this led to the EITI in 2019 publishing a report on fast trade disclosures and also strengthening their requirements with regard to these disclosures. So why did all this come about? In order to understand really the need for these requirements, we need to look at some of the risks that were identified in the fast trade process. Here we break down into 3 stages. The first beginning with a selection of buyers and allocation of sales contracts. Here, some of the governance and reputational risks that have been identified include bribery of officials to secure contracts. And we have seen this come to light recently with convictions in Switzerland of some commodity traders. There has also been some identified cases of conflict of interest by officials in charge of allocations. Again, when it comes to selection of buying companies, I would say information that has come to light is that some of the companies that have won these tenders do not have the capacity to undertake these liftings. That is, moving of the actual hard cargo, if we're looking at oil, from the country to the market. Another issue that has been identified here is discretion in negotiation of terms, in that we find that sometimes countries are signing up to unfavorable terms because of the opacity when it comes to the selection of buyers. Some of the transparency measures here that are recommended to alleviate some of these issues include having an open and competitive tendering process, as this levels the playing field and ensures that all parties are aware of what is needed for them. Another one would be transparency in the identification of buying companies. As we're all aware, beneficial ownership is now coming to the forefront in several jurisdictions, and there is increased calls by governments for companies to identify who are the ultimate owners of these organizations. If we look at sales transactions and collection of revenues, some of the governance and reputational risks here include revenue leakages and a lack of public understanding about the payments made from buying companies to governments. This can be dealt with by, for example, having accessible and standardized sales terms. Again, this all goes back to contracting and hence the importance of contract transparency to ensure standardization. The issue of lack of public understanding can also be tackled through regular disclosures by sellers and buyers on the volumes and value of the sale of this oil, gas, and minerals. What this does is ensure that the citizens are aware that they are receiving fair value. Last but not least, another governance, I would say, issue identified was in the transfer of proceeds to Treasury. Here, some of the issues identified included misallocation or diversion of revenues and a general public mistrust of how revenues from the sale of oil, gas, and minerals are being managed or benefiting the country. Again, disclosures here can assist in tackling this, in that when it's very clear how the buyers are transferring the proceeds from this, be it to the state or to the state-owned enterprise, that creates confidence. And lastly, we have experienced cases where there's a lack of public understanding when it comes to special financing agreements. Specifically here, we talk about resource-backed loans or prepayment deals. Again, the transparency of these special sales agreements can ensure that, one, the government has negotiated the best deal possible under the circumstances, and therefore provides, again, the citizenry with a level of comfort as to regards the type of contracts that the government is entering into. Based on the foregoing, the EITI developed requirement 4.2, which, as I just mentioned, looks at the sale of the government's in-kind revenues. So this infographic shows what we mean, what part of the transaction we're looking at. So here, as this infographic shows, it shows the volumes collected by the state or state-owned enterprise. Then it shows the next stage of the transaction, which is the volume sold to each buyer, or it could be to one buyer, depending on, again, the volumes. And then finally, the last stage of the transaction is the values received for each buyer for the sale of this. Now, this requirement has four components, A, B, C, and D, which look at different parts of the transactions. So requirement Part A looks at implementing countries, state-owned enterprises, and third parties selling on behalf of the government are required to disclose volumes sold and values received, disaggregated by sales contracts. This requirement also goes to state that disclosures on the process for selecting buyers and of sales contracts are encouraged in order to enhance transparency. Furthermore, it requires buying companies, it encourages buying companies to disclose their payments to governments for oil, gas, and minerals in order to assist civil society reconcile these transactions. And lastly, where there are concerns about data reliability, the MSG should consider efforts to address some of these gaps. Now, before I move into the disclosures of commodity sales by government, I'd like to stop here and welcome any questions from participants.
Yes, that would be very great, Fatma. And we do have a few questions. So here comes the first. Is there any country that uses a public exchange to engage buyers in the sale of oil? If so, what is the name of the exchange?
Thank you for that question. As per right now, I would say we are not aware of any government, that uses a public exchange. Most of them are using tendering process, and some are open, some are closed.
Thank you so much. Now here's the next one. Is the MSG, the multi-stakeholder group, involved in any part of the process relating to the sale of Guyana's share of oil?
Excellent question. As of right now, no, it is not. And at the end of this presentation, I will be presenting, I would say, a proposal for a project that would see the MSG have more involvement in this. Thank you.
Thank you. And here comes the last one, what we have now. Is GYEITI satisfied with the amount of disclosures / data by government relating to the sales of Guyana oil lifts? What does GIEITI think about the current government disclosing far less data than the previous government?
I would not want to speak on behalf of GYEITI. I would leave that to the national coordinator. But what I can say, as from the perspective of the International Secretariat, is that we would like to see further disclosures by the government, and I will be presenting, that is what my presentation. So the next two parts of my presentation will be looking at best practice by governments and best practice by companies in other countries. Thank you.
That's great. Then let's move on to those parts and let's see if we get some more questions about them.
Excellent. This part of the presentation will now look at commodity sales disclosures by governments in other countries. So as part of the EITI's work, we have an SOE network, which works with state-owned enterprises in both EITI implementing and non-EITI implementing countries to enhance commodity trading transparency. The slide before you shows a snapshot of some of the type of commodity trading studies that have been conducted in different countries. and I'm just going to speak to two of them in the interest of time. In Ghana, their 2018 commodity trading report included recommendations related to the buyer selection process, crude oil pricing, and beneficial ownership disclosures. These disclosures were an integral part of Ghana's EITI reporting and addressed key requirements of the EITI standard, which their national oil company, Ghana National Petroleum Corporation, has been acting on. And I would also just like to go ahead and state that through this Ghana commodity trading report, the government realized that they were also pricing crude from their different, I would say, wells differently. So that helps them also standardize. One was lower than the other. So this also helped with standardization and therefore increasing their revenues. I'll also highlight the case from Indonesia. Their 2018 commodity trading report provided an initial diagnostic of crude oil export systems, including recommendations on transparency and retention of historical information. In a net oil importing country, there was also scope for applying principles of transparency to commodity imports for their regulator SKK Migas. So in Indonesia, if I may expound here a little bit as well, is that what we realized is that whilst this information was being captured, it was not being stored in a way that was easily accessible and would help government. What we mean by this is that when you look at how oil companies work, they use a lot of historical data for their financial modeling. However, the government of Indonesia was not capturing this information and therefore was not using this, to their benefit when undertaking their financial modeling for potential projects. So, there are, very many, I would say, different benefits of looking at how commodity trading is, being undertaken in a country, because ultimately it does lead to, I would say, tangible recommendations, not only for how the state can enhance transparency, but also in some instances, increase their revenues in the short term. This slide looks at the current disclosures that are being undertaken by the Nigeria National Petroleum Corporation. This excerpt is from their website and shows their monthly lifting profile for January 2020. So in this instance, the EITI with the Nigeria National Secretariat, the Nigeria EITI or NATI, as well as the NNPC, the Nigeria National Petroleum Corporation, formed a working committee in order to increase the disclosure of information by their national oil company. So what this committee did was identify very tangible steps that could be taken by the National Petroleum Corporation on a month-to-month basis. So this included, for example, a publication of their monthly lifting profile. And as you can see, this information was disaggregated by customer, vessel, the type of fiscal regime, the quantity in barrels, the unit price, and the sales values. Aside from this, there were also other aspects we looked at, which was, for example, gender. And what that revealed, which was interesting, is that it showed that whilst they had, I would say, a good amount of women in the workforce, most of these ladies were not in positions of management. So again, have the case for affirmative action, but there also needs to be impactful affirmative action. So this for me is also a case of an example where commodity sales transparency, again, addressed a myriad of issues, which not only included just revenues, but also looking at, as I said, gender. Another thing also that came out of this was that the national oil company was also not publishing their expenditures on their social expenditures, which again is very important because these are also avenues for what we term as off-budget expenditures. So publishing this information also created a sense of accountability. So this is, again, a template that was developed by their national oil company in conjunction with the International Secretariat. And that's why we encourage, governments to be part of this process in order to develop, I would say, tools that will work for them. Because we do appreciate that in each country, the context is different. And so it's important to develop tools that are meaningful and will be used for the long term. This is an example of reconciliation of crude oil sales in Iraq. As I mentioned at the onset, Iraq has been disclosing this information since 2011. And the State Organization for Marketing of Oil, or SOMO as it's called, sells crude oil to international buyers and remits the proceeds to the Development Fund of Iraq, net of its costs and margins. The crude oil export sales data is disclosed by both SOMO and the crude oil buyers. And to date, a total of over 400 billion USD in crude oil sales has been disclosed. So again, if you're looking at the EITA requirement, this shows clearly the whole transaction in that you can see the volumes that were sold, how much was transferred, and also gives an understanding of why it was transferred. Because here, as you can see, the marketing oil company SOMO was retaining some of the revenues in order to cover its operating costs. Lastly, I'd just like to touch on why is commodity trading important for government. First and foremost, it can support greater competition. At the end of the day, this oil, gas, and minerals are a finite resource. And therefore, as a state and as citizens, it is crucial to maximize profits and revenues from this industry. Additionally, it gives governments increased access to capital. And this is because investors will always look at books in order to understand the, I would say, financial health of a state or of an SOE. So by publishing this data and ensuring that this data conforms with recognized standards such as the IMF and the EITI, it gives confidence to investors. Lastly, by enhancing efficiency in government operations, it can increase revenues and thus increasing the government's share of dividends in these extractive ventures. I'd now like to stop there before moving into the next segment. Thanks.
That's really great. Thank you so much, Fatma, for sharing all this incredible information. And we do have some questions for you. So here we go. Is the fee/commission earned by the seller/broker in the sales of oil required to be disclosed?
So when it comes to disclosures, no, what we are looking at are certain terms of the contract. We have not been required to bring them to disclose their fees, because that would be included ideally in the sales contract. And that comes under, I would say, contract transparency in general.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. And this one goes back actually to the previous questions that we have, but let's see if we can get an answer. We have never heard of Guyana's MSG making any statements about sale of Guyana's oil. Does it mean they are not involved?
Well, with regards to involvement of the MSG, I would say they are involved in that we have had discussions with and presentations with the International Secretariat on the importance of commodity trading transparency in Guyana. I would say perhaps the next step for the MSG is to understand what more they could do in this field, given that now we have had 6 lifts, in Guyana. So what is the next step? Now that there has been some, I would say there's been a generation of information when it comes to lifting of oil sales in Guyana. So this for me is a right time for the MSG to do more work in this field. Thanks.
Thank you, Fatma. The next one, are there any recommendations on who can be seller/broker for oil? Such as, is a good idea to have the oil producer as the seller?
I would say there are different, how do I put it? There are different scenarios in different countries. So what I mean by this is that, for example, if you look at Mexico, Pemex, the national oil company, created a subsidiary that is their commodity trading arm, known as PMI. If you look at other countries like Nigeria, for example, the national oil company, NNPC, sells directly to commodity traders. So what I would say in this instance is that there's no one size fits all. And that's why it is critically important for countries to delve deep and understand, what is our legal framework? What is our fiscal framework? And based on this understanding, what is the most efficient way for us to go? Because every industry, every country is unique, and they have different circumstances in their particular oil and gas sector in their country. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think with that answer, we are ready for the next section of your presentation.
Thank you very much, Kitty. I will now next move to disclosure of commodity sales by companies. As I said at the onset, these transactions have two people involved. On the one side, you have the state or state-owned enterprises, and on the other side, you have companies. And in order for us to close this transparency loop in commodity trading, both parties need to meet at the middle. So when it comes to companies, the EITI has released EITA guidelines for buying companies for companies buying oil, gas, and minerals from countries. These guidelines were launched in September of 2020 and during the Financial Times annual summit on commodity trading. And what they do is assist countries to disclose, again, the volumes and values of oil, gas, and minerals that they have purchased from governments. What is the purpose of these guidelines? One is to ensure standardized reporting. What we had seen previously is that different companies were using different formats and I would say different structures, and this made it difficult for not only multilateral organizations such as the EITI to understand, but also civil society and academics. So by having a standardized form of reporting, it's easier for everyone to synthesize this information and analyze it. Secondly, by companies disclosing their end of the transaction, it assists in confirming state or SOE data. As we saw before, for example, through the Nigeria monthly lifting profile, there you have the state saying, we sold to this buyer, this is the value, this is the amount. When we have the same information being disclosed by companies, it's very easy for citizens and civil society actors to confirm and therefore close opportunities for corruption. Which goes to my third point, that the importance again of these guidelines was to mitigate corruption by clearly, I would say, showing how much money is being received and the values and volumes being moved. And last but not least, it enhances public confidence. I think we can all agree that extractive industries is a very emotive sector, and there has been, unfortunately, historically, a lot of suspicion surrounding these transactions. So by providing this data, it helps to build public confidence and therefore even helps companies in getting their social license to operate. So what are some of the key disclosure elements in these guidelines? We have 4 key questions that we ask. One, who is buying the product? So here we ask for the buying entity name. Secondly, who is selling the product? Here we ask for the name of the counterparty country, because in some countries, in bigger oil producing countries, you will note that the state has formed several state-owned enterprises. And we also require the load port, because something we have seen from the data is that sometimes the load port can actually vary from the country where the oil was extracted. Thirdly, what product is being purchased? Here we ask for the volume as well as the grade. And lastly, what does the buyer pay to the seller for the product? Here we ask for the type of oil, because depending on whether it's crude or refined, of course, the value will differ greatly. And lastly, we also require the USD value, given that as well as on the others, oil, for example, is transacted in USD, and we have SOEs also reporting in USD. So by having one currency, again, it makes reconciliation easier. So we have provided 3 types of templates, and the difference is on the level of disaggregation. So the reason the EITI took this approach is that we are cognizant that companies were sensitive about disclosing this information. They were concerned that it would affect their competitive edge. And what we did to this regard is we sought legal advice in order to ensure no laws are being violated. And I would like to say, we particularly looked at the US laws EU laws and UK laws, because that's where most of the hubs are. And for example, when it comes to the US, so long as the data being disclosed is more than 3 months old, it does not violate any regulations. And when it comes to the EU, provided the data is more than 12 months old, it does not violate any regulations. And therefore, the EITA decided to adopt 12 months as the lag time in order to standardize and make sure it's compliant in all jurisdictions. So the templates that we have developed vary, as I've said, in the level of disaggregation. Template 1, just look at volumes and values by individual seller. In template 2, we delve a little deeper and look at volumes by cargo. So just not by seller, but now, if depending on the seller, each cargo. And then in template 3, it's volumes and values by cargo. So what we encourage companies to do is aspire to higher and higher levels of disaggregation as they release their payments to government reports. Here, I'd just like to show you an example of the template, and all this information is available on the EITI website. So this is the type of templates that companies use. As you can see, we try to provide them. This is template 2, which is the disclosure of volumes by cargo of each individual seller. And we also try to provide them with a narrative so that they can understand exactly what we mean by the information. And for the companies that may be on the line, I'd just like to extend that the International Secretariat is willing and able to sit with you and assist you in discussing this to understand what would be most suitable for you to begin disclosing, your sales in Guyana. This is an excerpt from Glencore's 2019 Payments to Government report that was released in June of 2020. And Glencore, for example, uses template 2 because what they're showing is disaggregation by cargo. And I'd like, again, to call on companies to, go following the example of other, I would say, of their competitors that are doing this. To date, we've had several organizations that have implemented the guidelines, including Equinor, Total Energies, Glencore, Gunvor, and Trafigura. Lastly, why is commodity trading transparency important for companies? One, it assists in documenting their contribution to national economies. Again, this goes back to the social license to operate. When, as citizens, we can see how companies are improving, for example, not only the GDP, but also other sectors, then you will support the operations of this company in your country. Again, the more companies disclose, the better their access to capital, because it's very clear to investors, especially in the case of joint ventures, which are the most common tool for exploration of oil in countries. It assists investors to know the viability of these options. Thirdly, it complements the state's efforts to enhance transparency. This is critically important because in countries where we've seen disclosures like some of the ones I highlighted, like Iraq, Nigeria, Ghana, and even Albania, to some extent, the governments were hesitant because they felt there might not be support from companies. So it's very important for companies to work jointly with the government. Lastly, there is existing precedent on company level reporting. And therefore, this is not, we're not calling for any new or radical, I would say, changes in this field. I'd now like to stop there before we hone in on disclosure of commodity sales in Guyana. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nyambura. And here is the next question. We have a few. Number 1, how transparent are the Ghana oil companies? Do they really disclose every deal?
Did you say Ghana or Guyana?
Ghana.
Okay. So when it comes to Ghana, okay, let's look at it from two areas. One, on the side of government, yes. So the national oil company, Ghana National Petroleum Corporation, last year published all their lifting profiles from 2015 to 2019. So 2015 is the first time that Ghana sold oil, and they published all this data. So the information that the state did not have was on the sale by companies. So right now, as we speak, we are currently producing Ghana's second commodity trading report. And here what GATI, or the Ghana National EITI, and the government and even their national oil companies seeking to understand is the value of sales of international oil companies. So I would say in Ghana, we are now in step 2, which is looking, the government has already disclosed, now it's the companies that we're seeking to disclose. Thanks.
Thank you so much for the clarification. Here is the next question. Guyana disclosed its 6 oil lifts that were sold. However, I'm not aware that the oil companies publicly disclosed the volume of oil they were allocated. What are the requirements for the oil companies to disclose in terms of volume of the oil they were allocated and how much they sold for it?
So to that question, yes, I will agree with the person who asked that. Neither am I aware of any disclosures as regards the liftings that have taken place to date in Guyana. And that is what in this, final part of my presentation that, what we will be calling for is enhanced transparency when it comes to commodity trading in Guyana, and calling on companies to work with EITA and the government to disclose this information.
Very good to know. Thank you. Here is the next question. Can you clarify if a private oil producing company sold oil in December 2019, would that mean by the EITA requirements that oil company would need to disclose by January 2021 how much oil it sold?
Thank you for that question. And yes, so the lag on disclosures in order to comply with the legal requirements in all jurisdictions is 12 months. I'll just reiterate that whilst in the US jurisdiction, the Department of Justice only requires a 3-month lag, the European Commission and the UK laws require a 12-month lag. So in order to standardize, the EITA decided to adopt a 12-month lag to make standardization simple across all jurisdictions. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And here's the last question we have for this segment. Is Ghana part of the Open Government?
The OGP partnership? Yes, Ghana is a part of OGP.
Thank you so much. These are the questions we have for now. And I encourage all participants to enter your questions in the Q&A, as we have another Q&A section coming up right after the next session from Ms. Nyambura's presentation.
Thank you very much, Kitty. So bearing in mind all that we have discussed, which is we now understand the history of commodity trading transparency, why it is important to a country, what the government can do, its disclosures, and of course, the role of companies. Now we try to bring this conversation home and look at Guyana. So here I'll start with, what is the business case for transparency when it comes to citizens? Because ultimately, these natural resources are owned by the people. So what commodity transparency ensures is that all parties understand the terms on which the trades takes place, including the funds available for public expenditures. What again, sometimes we have seen in our work is that hostilities arise between industry, civil society, and government purely because of a lack of understanding. So what I would say consistent and systematic disclosures can do is build trust and confidence amongst all stakeholders. Secondly, it provides the ability to compare the terms of agreements and increases the ability of anti-corruption agencies, civil society, and the media to scrutinize arrangements, giving citizens confidence that their governments have secured the best deal. As I just mentioned in the previous example when we were talking about Ghana, following the first commodity trading reports, the government realized that they were pricing oil differently in 2 fields that they are running. So again, by looking at these arrangements periodically and analyzing them, it can assist the government in ensuring that they are getting the best deal possible at the moment. And this is being cognizant that the extractive industries is very cyclical. If we look at COVID, for example, we had a near crash, and now the trend has been going upwards. And therefore, it's very important for all stakeholders to be very agile in order to maximize during the boom times. Lastly, transparency complements other information being disclosed by government under EITA, and allows for greater insights into how a country's natural resources are being bought and sold. And this again just goes to the, I would say, the fact that these resources are finite. And therefore it's very important that both the government and citizens feel that they are getting the best possible deal, at that time. So now I'd like to look at, based on that information and cognizant that Guyana has undergone 6 liftings, we at the EITI are ready and are willing to provide support through GYEITI to the multi-stakeholder group to delve into the topic of commodity trading transparency more keenly. By this, we mean this would entail carrying out 2 trainings. The first of which would be proposing a technical workshop on the management of oil sales and negotiations that would be delivered by an expert in this field. Some of the suggested topics that we would pose to the MSG to look at would include the process for selecting buyers. As one of the people who asked the question just said, there've been 6 liftings, and therefore now we have the data on how was this process done? Were there ways it could have been done better? Did the government get the best possible deal? Additionally, looking at the dynamics of international oil sales, negotiations, and price determination. Thirdly, another key element that would be critical for the multi-stakeholder group to understand is what are the characteristics of international oil markets? This is bearing in mind that Guyana is a new player to the field, and therefore, given that there are a lot of lessons learned and best practices that are available, how can Guyana learn from that and avoid making the pitfalls that others have made? So the second training, that we would propose still after, in line with commodity trading transparency, now would delve deep after setting the scene. We see the first training as an opportunity to set the scene and build, collectively the multi-stakeholder groups understanding and expertise in commodity oil sales, and now look at what information related to oil sales from the selection of buyers, pricing, volume, and sales is crucial to have publicly available in order to ensure that, oil extraction is sustainable and that the government and the people of Guyana are receiving the best value. Also, it would look at, as part of EITA implementation, understanding, are there challenges that are plaguing government industries and preventing them from disclosing this data? The reason I say that is because, again, in Nigeria and Ghana, for example, we came to find out that their national oil companies did not have disclosure policies. And therefore, this prevented them from systematically disclosing this information. And what we did in those instances is work with these national oil companies to develop disclosure policies from them that allowed them to now provide this information systematically. Then again, as we said, because this transaction, looks at both sides of the coin, what are the challenges preventing companies buying Guyanese oil from disclosing this information? And last but not least, as the question came, the role of the multi-stakeholder group. How can they empower citizens to hold both the government and companies accountable through this data that would hopefully, be available? Lastly, following these trainings, we would propose, for example, to the multi-stakeholder group to consider undertaking a commodity trading report looking at oil sales in Guyana. So this report, again, would, looking back at the 2 trainings, analyze, are there any questions that have come up, anything that needs to be interrogated further? Again, here, I would look at, for example, what are the legal and fiscal frameworks, the structures governing, the movement of funds from the ministries, the role of the ministry, for example, in the regulation of oil, because here it is given that Guyana does not have a national oil company, the ministry is playing a dual role in that they're also selling, but also setting, I would say, the frameworks for the management of this industry. Are there challenges there? Perhaps, there could be a call for a bit more, I would say, delineation of responsibilities in order to enhance transparency. Just asking some of these questions among stakeholders in order to spur debate. We would also propose, having, as I said, lessons learned from 3 to 4 countries, major oil producing countries that have been implementing the EITA, in order for Guyana to understand what were the challenges in this, transparency journey. Again, we are cognizant that this will not happen overnight. But what it definitely does require is the goodwill from all actors around the table. And then lastly, as I mentioned in the example of Nigeria, looking at, most importantly, what works for Guyana and what is sustainable. At the end of the day, it does not make sense, I would say, as the International Secretariat, for us to just give a tool and walk away. No. We are keen to ensure that any interventions proposed or recommendations, for example, would be directly responding to the needs, requirements, and suggestions from stakeholders in Guyana. And this, would be including all the voices around the table in the multi-stakeholder group, from government to civil society, and even the companies who are actually, doing this lifting and sale of this oil. Thank you very much, and I'll now open the floor to questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nyambura. It's been such an enlightening presentation you've provided us with, and it sparked some questions. So here we go. The first one is, can you talk about how hedging and futures are used in selling of oil by other countries and the required EITI disclosures of such transactions?
So one, I'll speak to as you said, what is required by EITI. These are what we call special cases or special agreements. And yes, we do call on the state to disclose this information, again, because it pertains to the sale of the state's share of revenue. So we do ask them to disclose. So these special arrangements do vary from hedging to resource-backed loans to, as you've said, futures. It really depends on the type of contract that has been drafted between the state or state-owned company and the commodity trading firm. Your question on recommendation, that, to be honest, I don't think I'd be in a position to give, because every case, is unique. Hedging has worked in some countries where prices did collapse, but they had hedged at a higher price. So this, I would say, I would leave it to people with greater technical expertise in, economics and finance than myself. But what I would state is that, it is not necessarily an evil. But what is required is that more in-depth analysis needs to be done by the state to ensure that that is the right option for them at that point in time. Thank you.
Thank you. Now here comes the next question. You mentioned you will call for more disclosure by the oil companies. Would you engage the Guyana media to highlight this issue to the Guyanese public, especially that the oil companies have not disclosed how much oil they've been allocated up to May 2020?
With regard to making a public statement, I would encourage whoever made that comment, please reach out. We'd be very interested in crafting a message to show how other states have worked on disclosure and, encourage the Guyanese state to follow best practice, in commodity trading transparency. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nyambura. Now we have some time for some closing remarks before I encourage participants to join our next session. So if you'd like to share anything in parting from the audience, this would be a good time.
Thanks, Kitty. I think what I'd just say in conclusion is, from the comments that have come from people, is that it appears that there is a real appetite to enhance transparency in commodity trading in Guyana. And, we would encourage, as I said, not only government and industry, but also civil society to work through the MSG, to work with GATE in order to, I would say, have tangible steps when it comes to Guyana. Because here, we'd really be starting from the base, as I said, understanding even what volumes and values are being sold, what how are these buyers being selected, for each and every lifting? What are some of the terms and conditions in this contract? So there's a real opportunity here, given the industry is so nascent, I would say, to do it and do it the right way. As we've seen from examples, in other countries, it can be done. For example, in Iraq, as you're all aware, Iraq is one of the major oil producers. They've got hundreds of fields, and there the commodity traders include, Equinor, Total, to even smaller organizations. Yet they are able to provide this information by cargo. That is the level of granularity. So what I would state that, my call to all stakeholders is that this can be done. Let us work together to do it for Guyana and for the people of Guyana. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nyambura. It's been an enlightening conversation, and we had plenty of questions for you. And in closing, I would like to encourage our participants to do a couple of things. And I will share my screen with you and walk you through a couple of suggestions that you might want to consider joining us for the remainder of the conference. This is our conference website, the Guyana Extractives Industry Transparency Week website. Now, what else we have in store for you today on day 2 is right after lunch at 1 o'clock, the next presentation is Women's Brave Sojourn in Male-Dominated Industries. We are looking forward to a really interesting conversation with you on this. Then at 2:30, we have a panel discussion, Working Career, Opportunities in the Extractive Sectors. We have esteemed panelists joining us, and please tune in. It starts at 2:30 in the afternoon, Guyana time. Now at 4 o'clock, we have a mystery session. Come and find out for yourself what we have in store for you. It's going to be very interesting. And then the last presentation of the day 2 is starting at 5 o'clock Guyana time, Extractives and Open Government. So this is what we have on the agenda for today. And also, I'd like to show you one more thing on our website. It is our transparency survey. It is a survey that we encourage all participants and all interested parties to take part. And as more and more of you complete the survey, we share the results real time. And let me show it to you how it works. You can take the survey just by clicking on the take button. And then when you are ready to view the survey results, you can see it right here on the website. And as more and more people complete it, we're going to get more and more information. So just this one, how do you feel that the oil and gas industry has a positive impact on Guyana? Do you feel that way? You can see the answers. And we have many, many questions that the answers are coming in real time. So please take a moment and add your opinion and your perspective so that we can have a robust sample of opinions. And it's been all shared. It's very transparent on the website. It is all on the conference website. You can, if you put your attention in the chat box, I've been sharing some links with you throughout this conversation. So you have quick access to the website, to the agenda, and to the transparency survey. And come back time to time to the website to see the updated results on the transparency survey, because it moves every time we have a new opinion added to the discussion. And with that, I would like to say thank you to Ms. Nyambura for this enlightening conversation and taking all the questions that the audience had. And I see that there is some information sharing in the chat. Ms. Nyambura, is it okay if I put your email address into the public forum so everybody can see it?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
All right. So this is an email address where you can reach out to Ms. Nyambura for any questions. I'm sure that she sparks your interest, and she's such an ally for the transparency work in Guyana. So I encourage you to take the opportunity to reach out to her. With that, thank you so much for joining, and we will continue our conference after lunch break at 1 o'clock, 1 p.m. Guyana time, and hopefully we get to see many of you back after lunch. Ms. Nyambura, thank you so much, and good afternoon, good evening to you in Oslo. We are just so honored to have you participate in our conference and share your experience, your knowledge, and your passion for this work.
Thank you for your time. And I've really enjoyed the dialogue with the participants, and I'm looking forward to seeing tangible improvements in commodity trading transparency happening in Guyana. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.